Hey y'all, this is Ed,
And this Kara.
and this is your day's dumpster fire, where we don't celebrate humanity's successes.
But its most fantastic failures.
Yo,
Yo, how's it going?
you know, I can't complain. I have no blood left in my body from a really bad camping trip, but for the most part, I'm doing pretty good for being a living mummy. How are you doing?
Random question. Is your wife in just as bad a shape as you are? Is she okay?
No.
Oh.
Normally when the wife and I go on a camping trip, she gets absolutely eaten alive by every bug known to mankind. And she'll come back like super pasty, emaciated, devoid of like iron because she was a breeding ground for like 5,000 mosquitoes. But this trip, no, she was fine. She had like 5 bites.
I guess
But
it was your turn.
it was my turn, and I think what it was is because I barbecued a lot of meat going up there. Like I did a pork shoulder, a brisket, and a bunch of other meat, like super smoky, tasty, flavored meats. And my arteries were thoroughly congested and clogged with all that barbecue. That if you're a mosquito passing by, you're going to get a whiff of that, and you'll be like, I need a piece of that.
That was 1,000% your fault then.
I totally brought this on myself, and yeah, I'm lucky to be alive. But I can honestly say, Tutankhamun, I know how you feel.
We should talk about Tutankhamun one of these days.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm gonna put
There's actually a book I've been reading, um, that it's it's a book that's taking the most recent scientific discoveries about ancient human history, and it's looking at these discoveries, and it's basically concluding that we may have ancient human history incorrect. Like the idea that, hey, scientists say that, human or Europeans didn't land in the Americas until the 1500s. But there's a lot of discoveries saying that no, like there was a global market, a global economy in like 12,000 BC. And it's a that into itself would be its own dumpster fire because it flies in the face of how we look at ancient history. So,
that is a really large dumpster fire that would require a lot of time, effort, and at least two, maybe three episodes.
no, I'll try to condense it down into one 3 hour episode.
Perfect. Listeners are gonna love it.
Yeah, no, and then the publishers are going to have a ball with it,
Yeah,
and
it's gonna be
well, I mean,
great.
sure.
Editing it is going to be even better.
Oh yeah, what's even more better. Sorry, guys, for the bad grammar there, but you work in education. Guess what you get to do someday is go back and have to re-edit and change all of your lesson plans to account for the fact that like Egyptians and early Spaniards and Romans and the Greeks were hitting America before Columbus was even in existence.
We will cross that bridge when we get there. I'm not
Yes.
going to worry about that right now. That
Yeah,
sounds
we don't need to set
wonderful.
the comments feed on fire um at this moment, but it was an interesting camping trip read when I was being siphoned of all my blood, and there was a lot of very thought provoking stuff in there. So I figured, you know what? Let's add this onto our list of topics. But what I really want to know is you're telling me that you had a very fascinating trash can fire,
I
and
do
I'm
have.
really curious to see what this is about.
Okay. So, as you know, I am a teacher. We just based on it. during this summer. For anybody who's listening at this time of recording, we are in late July. So for this summer, I have been helping with summer camp. And the kids' ages range from like 5 to 9, right? So I had a 5-year-old boy come up to me and he goes, "Hey, I need to go to the bathroom." I said, "Okay, go to the bathroom. I don't care." Right? So he goes to the bathroom. About 2 seconds later, another little boy goes up to me and said, "Hey, I need to go to the bathroom." I'm like, "Can you wait until he gets back?" Because little boys in a bathroom together, it's kind of scary
Yeah,
in a way
terror
where they
stacks gotta
will
go down.
cause mischief and like ruin things or do crazy
What,
things. Not
toilets?
like yeah. Anyway, they're 5. So, but he's like, I can't hold it. I really have to go, and I didn't want to get a call from anybody. So I'm like, okay, fine, go. So about 5 6 minutes go by, and I start to get worried, thinking either they got lost somewhere, they were causing mischief and mayhem. So the first little boy comes out. No, I'm sorry. The second little boy comes out. He's running towards me, and the first little boy is right behind him, and he's shouting, "He pooped in the urinal! He pooped in the urinal!" And then the first little boy comes up and he goes, "Yeah, but he put toilet paper in there and then he started flushing it over and over again." So apparently they flooded the bathroom because they pooped in the urinal. And I really didn't want to deal with it, so I called the principal over and I had them talk to
Oh, jeez. You know what's amazing is that it's always boys.
her. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's always the boys that mess up everything, literally.
I have to
So,
say it made for a great story, and I'm not mad about it because probably because I didn't have to clean it up. But
oh yeah, no, that's like front row seats to the poo show right there.
oh yeah, that's a literal poo show.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. No, that's a good one. Yeah. No,
Yeah, pretty solid.
it's a great way to just really set the tone for what we have up for today.
And what do we have for today, Ed?
I I have probably one of the greatest dumpster fires in modern history. And it involves a certain guy. You may have heard of him in the past. Every bulldog and every baby says they all look like him, but we're looking at Winston Churchill. And me as a history nut, I freaking love Winston Churchill. The way he held together Britain in World War II, and when like in the early stage of the war where London was being bombed on a daily basis, and he did these radio broadcasts where it was just his voice. It was like the first podcast where he held together a nation. And one would think like, wow, talk about a guy who was born into that position. Like some divine being said, "Hey, we need a Winston Churchill at this moment and he will save the day." Well, it turns out that maybe this guy wasn't necessarily plucked out of nowhere to be this destined figure in history, but maybe he was forged. He was hammered into or pounded and beaten into this figure that we tend to focus on in the movies and in the books and all that kind of stuff. But this guy has what I would say is most importantly a huge record of just absolute failures.
You think that's
And
why he was so bitter?
um well, maybe. I mean, he would often tell people beneath him that yes, I'm a monster because that's what it takes to defeat Hitler. He had absolutely no qualms into he had no qualms falling into this category of, yeah, I'm going to be a jerk. I'm going to be an absolute a-hole to the enemy because that's what it takes to defeat that kind of an enemy. And it really boils back to his greatest failure in his adult career. And this is a failure so big and so massive that it forced him to resign his position into what we would call the admiralty in America, but at his time it was like the first lord of the navy kind of a thing. And yeah, he took such a demotion that he became a light colonel on the front lines in France and Germany. He was trying to like figure out a way that let me die in the most glorious manner possible so I can try to recoup what I had messed up. That that huge mess up is a battle that we don't really talk about. I mean, I remember going through high school, junior high, high school, even college, studying Western history. Yeah, it's World War One. Like we tend to gloss over it. We tend to focus on the trench warfare, the diseases, the horrific consequences of all this, but we never really look at Gallipoli. We never look at the Dardanelles Straits. We don't look at this territory that the British were trying to kind of route out to create a path between basically Western Europe and Russia because Russia had no navy. And so that's what I want to talk about. I want to look at this gargantuan failure that is the Battle of Gallipoli, how Britain made a gross misunderstanding of the forces that they were going up against, even though those forces were significantly weaker than the British Empire. Yeah, it is literally the dumpster fire of 1915.
Let's go.
Right? Yeah, I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Everything. It's war.
Yes, I mean, we definitely covered this with emus. You
That was a
know,
very small scale compared to World War One,
it is,
but it was
but
funny. It was funny. It was great.
it's a reoccurring theme. There's so many times in human history where one force underestimated the strength of the opposing force. That opposing force got the upper hand. Yeah, and it happens time and time again, and it's us humans trying to say, "Hey, look, we're bigger, better, badder," and then they're like, "Oh, we got our butts kicked." So what we need to do is kind of kind of look at a little bit of what led up to this horrific campaign. The biggest thing that was going on is World War One broke out. Franz Ferdinand got assassinated, not knowing that he would become the name of a famous band the early 2000s. But yeah, this guy got killed. One thing led to another. All of Europe was in this huge state of imperialism, meaning they had the technology, they had the manpower, they had the ships, they had this ability to just go all over the world and say, hey, look, we have all this technology, we have all this manpower, we have all this weaponry, we have all this stuff, and we're going to take over your country to civilize you. We are going to enslave you. And most of at this time, most of it was Africa. Africa was just being completely torn apart, which, that will be another episode. Um,
I hate when we're talking about imperialism and the invading country is always talking about how they're going to uh, enslave the people, but then also bring them into society, like make you refined people, but they're also going to enslave them. That's very it doesn't work.
yeah,
I'm sorry, I hate that. Just a side note that like drives me insane and it happens all over history and all over the world. It drives me nuts.
yeah, no, if you ever read the book Things Fall Apart, yeah, we're talking about when we look at Africa, we're talking about states slash countries, kingdoms that have been operating in their own way for centuries.
Right,
Is
right.
it the same as a European way of handling a birthday or a death or a marriage? No, but it's their way. But then you have all these Europeans showing up saying, hey, we're here to make you better. and it's really tough to go like for those people in those countries to be like, but there's nothing wrong with us. We're just vibing. We're doing our own thing.
Yeah, they're
It's
chilling, man. Leave them alone. They're
yeah,
doing their culture and making beautiful art and being beautiful people. Leave them alone.
yeah, yeah. No, and they make the coolest like head masks known to mankind. Yeah, it's just that they're doing their own thing, but then I think what happened is technology. And we as a society, we love technology, right? The newest iPhone comes out, the newest Samsung phone comes out, the newest whatever, and we jump on that technology. Well, at this time in world history, that technology wasn't an iPhone, it was a machine gun. These machine guns were different than, say, like the Gatling guns from the Civil War, where you turned a crank and then you had a magazine of bullets that would be gravity fed into each barrel. And as you turn the crank, it would fire each round, not having to be reloaded. And you can pop off like 30, 40 rounds a minute. We are now dealing with guns that had these giant round barrels that were filled with water that could be easily disconnected and then another barrel can be reattached. And now they're shooting out hundreds of rounds per minute.
They can't kill emus though.
No, no, emus, they're bulletproof. Like they've got this stuff figured out. Um, so yeah, yeah, you're right. The machine guns don't work on emus; they only work on humans. And I think the emus knew that. I think the emus were in discussion with the machine gun manufacturer saying, "This is how you kill humans, but just so you know, it won't work on us."
I
And
think
I
they were just watching all this stuff go down in World War I, and they're like, "All right, that's not going to be us."
yeah, no, they were probably watching like the 1914 version of MSNBC or whatever, and they're just like, "Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
no.
we're good. We're
Yeah.
good. We got this."
Anyway, sorry to take
Um,
it back to the emus. Continue.
Well, yeah, I know it's the PTSD is real. It was a horrific time in human history, and we should never forget the sacrifices that those 50 emus made at the hands of a million bullets,
Yes.
to the
Anyways,
point where they're now the Australian national bird. No, but like what was going on was that Europe was transitioning out of this time period where the old 1800 strategies where soldiers lined up in rows and somebody would blow a whistle and then they would do a double step or like a half charge and they're being shot at and then they would try to just move these giant blocks of people around super condensed. If you're a machine gunner, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. This is one of the reasons why World War One was so horrific, is because both sides had incredible technology that's not a whole lot different than what we have today, but they're dealing with strategies and what they would call like quote unquote best practices that worked well in the early 1800s. Suddenly, the count would just skyrocket. It it resulted in a stalemate.
well, that's why the first part of the war was so bad, right? It was just because of the uh, like differences in technology on the battlefield. That's why it was so bad in the very beginning, right? And then it got better, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, it was really horrific, especially that first year where the Germans and the Allies, like they realized they couldn't just charge into a wall of machine guns. They couldn't do it. So what they did is they started digging all of these trenches, just miles and miles of trenches. And it got to the point where there it was a stalemate. Some colonel or whatever would blow a whistle, everybody would climb up the ladders and they would maybe make it 10, 15 yards down the field before they were all mowed down. And then they would do that over and over and over again until they actually created a wall of bodies, and then they would send people out to dig the next row of trenches. They used the bodies of the people that died in front of them to make the next trench. And so both sides were just inching their way east and west. And it got to the point where this war was going nowhere fast. And this is where Winston Churchill came in. Churchill was, well, let's just say this. Winston Churchill wasn't a whole lot different in the 1910s as he would be in the 1930s and the 1940s. At this time, he he had already established himself as a political leader. It's funny because if you look at him in 1914 versus say like 1944, the bro looks the same. He was born looking ancient, like Morgan Freeman. Like Morgan Freeman is Morgan Freeman, and you look at him in his 20s or in his 80s, it's Morgan Freeman.
It's
Um,
fair. It's fair. Yeah. How old was he? I'm sorry. How old was he?
let's see here. He had to have been in his. I think he was in his mid 30s
Okay.
because when he was born, he was actually born in the 1890s, and he no, actually the 1880s, and he was actually a part of the final contingent of almost like knights. Like they were charging in Africa, they were charging into battle with like swords and shield, a gun, and he was a part of that last contingency of the very old, almost medieval way of conducting war. And so like this guy saw a ton of change in his time. So when he was in World War One, I think he would have to have been in his mid to late 30s. Yeah, when he was in this, he knew Britain during the Victorian era, where Britain was the world superpower. Britain had by far the largest navy, the largest military force. They had the latest of technology. Britain was the force to be reckoned with. Britain, ever since Queen Victoria took over, all the way up until when she died in the 1890s, Britain led the way. And so Churchill, being a part of the Admiralty here, he had this mindset that there's nothing that we can do wrong. There's, this whole war will be taken care of quickly, efficiently, and it will be over essentially like after this first attack. This complacency messed with things. And then we look at Churchill's leadership, right? In all fairness, Churchill was a good judge of war. He was able to look at the size and scope of the information being presented to him. He was able to, for the most part, accurately, ascertain this is what we need to win this conflict.
Hmm.
Um, he had absolutely no problems confronting his superiors. Every year, without fail, every year he would write to his superiors, including the prime minister, and give them very poignant, very blatant advice of what Churchill thought they needed to work on.
Nice. Every general or commander's dream.
Yeah, no, like everybody treated Churchill as like some blowhard, like oh my god, all right, Churchill's writing us again. What?
Here he goes.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no, like, hey, Swindon, how big was the letter you got from Churchill? Like, mine was 72 pages. Oh, wow, mine was only 68 pages. And it and everybody just looked at Churchill as some blowhard, but with some talent. And everybody would kind of view Churchill as that. So that's the reason why when he looked at the stalemate between France and Germany, he's like, "Hey, we need to open up another front because we have to market this war, right? We have to sell this war to people to keep them invested, to keep buying bonds, keep working the factories, making the weaponry. There's at this time there's a lot of money to be had at being in a war." So Churchill figured, all right, let's open up another front. At this time, Russia had just gotten involved, precursor to Tsar Nicholas being annihilated. That's another dumpster fire in its own right. Yeah, Russia got involved, but they had no navy. They didn't have any air force. I mean, because 1914. Biplanes dropping hand grenades and hoping for the best. So, but they needed to be able to communicate to France and Britain. And so that's where the Battle of Gallipoli comes from. And if you look at this battle, basically we are focusing on the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea. In between that, we have the country of Turkey, i.e., the capital is modern day Istanbul or Constantinople, and then we have Greece to the left, and then we have this tiny little strip of water called the Dardanelles. That is the only way. You have to cross those Dardanelles to be able to get to the Black Sea. That's the only way to do it, and that's the only way you can establish a communication line between the Allies and Russia. Yeah, yeah, no, it looks good. If you look at a map of the Dardanelle channels, like, okay, yeah, no, I can see why this would be a big deal because right now you have Germans and then you have the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was predominantly controlled, or the main portion of it was Turkey. And that's why, like, you'll hear me throughout this say, the Turks or whatever, but in reality that was the Ottoman Empire, or what was left of it. They actually called it the I believe it was like this sick old man in the West, because the Ottoman Empire, it's really weird. If you look at its history, it started out after the Romans fell. It started off as a super powerful nation, and it kind of just petered out after that. Right? There
Yeah.
was no rise to power. No, they started off with this massive force, and then it just petered out through the centuries until everybody in Europe would be like, "Oh yeah, no, the Ottoman Empire, cool architecture. They got a capital with a cool name, um, but they're really not."
They're not something to worry about.
Yeah, yeah, no, they're not what they used to be. And so the idea was this: let's get together a big old navy, but we don't want to use our best ships because it's not needed. Why do we need to put our best ship to this? We're just trying to knock out the sick old man in the West. How hard can it possibly be? So they put together a pretty good sized fleet. They didn't use their dreadnoughts. They used the ships that were called pre-dreadnought. Now, when we hear the word dreadnought, we look at, say, ships like the USS Missouri, right, where there's multiple turrets of 12-inch guns, and these things were just absolutely terrifying to look at. The pre dreadnought stuff would be less armored, older. We're talking we're talking about cannons that used powder that wasn't smokeless, so people could see them firing a mile away. They didn't need to put their best ships out there. They didn't need to put everything they had into it, but it was a pretty good sized fleet. We're talking at least about 20 to 25 ships.
Okay.
And the idea was this: let's go down the Dardanelles. To the north was Cape Helles, and then to the south of this opening was Kumkale. These were the two main forts that kind of protected the entrance into the Dardanelles Straits. The idea was, let's send all these ships in, and just by the sheer power of British fleetness, we should have no problems taking out the embattlements and the way stations, all the rows of minefields that they had, and
Mm.
yeah, and ultimately, all they had to do was just get to this really, really narrow part. Ironically, they called it the Narrows because,
It's creative.
yeah, and they were sandwiched in between Khalid Bar and then I'm gonna butcher this name, but there was another fort to the east on the Asian side that was called Hemadaya and then Shemali. For you folks out there that are knowledgeable on the language of this part of the world, please feel free to correct me. I make no claims that I know what I'm talking about. So what went down? Okay, 1914, November 3rd. Winston Churchill came up with this brilliant plan, just rushing these straits. There was nothing that could go wrong.
Wait, nobody foresaw the sea of mines with your out of date boats?
Well,
I I just want to point that out. Like, what?
like nobody in the British Navy said, "Wait a second, like we're looking at what would become the 1914 version of the movie 300."
Yeah.
You have this giant army that's being channeled into a swath of water that was not even a mile wide. Nobody thought that this would be a big deal. Now, in all fairness, the British were not stupid. They did send boats out to detect these mines. Well, the way that the Turks set things up is they would chain these mines up. I know, like in the movies, we always see these mines that are just like floating in mid water and they have a chain going down at the bottom of the ocean. No, it was more like they anchored a chain on one coast and then they sent this chain across the other coast and they hanged these mines off in the water and they would hang out, about maybe 10, 15 feet under the water. So you really couldn't see them. But the British had this idea like, okay, we'll send out these little skids. We'll send out these tiny little boats. We'll give these guys some bolt cutters and they can just go out there and cut the chains and then the mines will sink to the bottom and then we'll be perfectly fine.
Problem solved.
Problem solved. The issue was is that they used civilians.
Mm.
We're talking about people who one didn't even understand where they were going or what they were doing. We're talking about people that had absolutely no desire to get involved in this conflict. And we're also talking about a bunch of people that had to go from the North Coast to the South Coast. There was, let me count them out here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 miniature fortresses of artillery and machine guns that were all pointed into the middle of this strait.
So they sent old Uncle Joe and cousin Jimmy to go do bomb squad in front of full force military, thinking it was a good idea.
Yeah, because the Turks really weren't involved anywhere else in the war. That was a thing. Like one of the points that one of the aspects that the British kind of messed up on was that, oh yeah, they're going to be spread super thin, but in reality, the Turks, or i.e. the Ottomans, they knew that this is the only way Britain and France could go through to ultimately get to Russia and create a communication line. So they fortified the crap out of this.
Yeah.
And so they had, what was it? It was in the magnitude of over 370 mines were placed in the Narrows. One of these mines could take out one ship, but typically what would happen is that a ship would hit this, and so the front of the ship would hit this chain, but the mines were set up in a way that they would be a time delay. So they would hit that chain, pull through it, and then those mines would then all swing around to the port and starboard sides, basically wrapping their way around it, and then they would detonate. And bye bye ship.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is the beginning of this horrific issue that turned into the Battle of Gallipoli. And so they even though the British Navy was extremely powerful, especially in numbers, they didn't send in their top of the line ships to the Dardanelles. If they sent in their dreadnoughts, they would have been better suited for it because one, they could handle the explosions, and two, they would have the firepower to take out these armaments. The big issue with the civilian groups is that they were going in there and they were getting gunned down, and they didn't. Like, who knows what to do when you're being shot at with machine guns? Like hundreds of machine guns.
I'd run. I wouldn't want to be in the first place. I'd run.
I'm out. Like, I'm good. I'll turn it. I'll. Here's my resignation. I'm out.
Yep. I will take the coward's way out and just not deal with
Yes.
any of that, please.
hmm and so the civilians had no idea what they were doing, so they would freak out, back out. Now, what were they going to tell the leaders? Oh, well, yeah, we cut them all. You're good to go. All right, you're free to go. Go back to England and have a cup of tea, and you're good to go. And so, yeah, it was a disaster. So, like the smaller civilian ships that were used to take out underwater mines, but they were essentially useless. With the 370 mines that were already in place in the Narrows, the Turks also had a group of vessels that would replace the missing mines overnight. They had boats that would essentially go back and forth and string new ones. What was worse is that if you're a cannon operator on these ships, you relied heavily on math. You relied heavily on at this time, it was really a lot of trigonometry to figure out the curvature and the arcing and all that kind of stuff, which is all fine and dandy when you're firing at an object that was staying put. But the Turks knew that. So what they created was a bunch of almost like highly mobile, like howitzers, 6, 8 inch guns that they could just pack up and move all along the coast. Yeah, it made it so that they would have all these false artillery positions or dummy positions. They would fire off like a couple dozen rounds. They would pack up and move somewhere else. Well, in the course of a night, these British cannons couldn't triangulate where to aim. Like, really, essentially, the brunt of this attack really just was useless. So, the other big thing is that when this was all going down, the British leadership as well as the French leadership, they were hanging out in Egypt. They could not see what was going on. They could not see what, like they couldn't make on site strategic decision. They couldn't see what was going on and be like, okay, we need to change tactics.
So they were getting fanned with palm leaves while all their guys were getting bombed out of the sky.
More like out of the ocean.
Well, yeah. Yeah. 100% correct. Thank you.
Yeah, there wasn't a thing called the Air Force back then. It would, Maverick would have had a heyday with this, taking his first gen fighter jet against third gen technology. Sorry, saw the new Top Gun movie. I'm still trying to wrap my head around why they just didn't launch missiles into that weird base in the bottom of a volcano.
I'm glad I didn't spend money on it.
Yeah, no, it's a good action flick, but it's just like, really,
Fair
that's
enough.
not how America would have done it. We would have just taken it out using Tomahawk missiles, and then 5 minutes later, the target destroyed. Cool. And so yeah, like we have all these factors going on. The leadership was disengaged. They sent in a whole bunch of ships that were grossly underpowered to handle this. They foolishly assumed that the minefields would be taken care of. They just assumed that the Turks didn't, like, they're the Turks. Like, what are they going to do? Well, what they failed to realize is that the Turks knew that, like, this was their shot. This was their chance to take on the world's biggest superpower and really mess things up. And that's exactly what happened. Literally, out of the dozens of ships that they sent in, none of the minesweepers were able to clear the mines due to the constant shelling and shooting from the Turks from above. And the new lines were being laid out without the British or the French knowing. They would do this overnight. Like, right off the bat, like 20 ships were sent into the strait. The Galoy was damaged. The Irresistible sunk. So that the Irresistible, if I remember correctly, was the most powerful ship of the pre-Dreadnought era.
Apparently it was resistible.
Yeah. Yeah, it was too much of a target to resist. Like, you just really had to go for it.
Nice.
The on the French side, the Bouvet was sunk. I love this one. The Inflexible was damaged.
Should have been more flexible.
Yeah, no, yeah, it should have been, should have really, like,
Should have
learned
rolled
how.
with those punches, man.
Yes. Yeah, no, like, maybe zigzag, try to be
Something.
flexible. Yeah,
Yeah. Come on.
yeah. The Suffren, I love the names of British ships. They do things, like, have really cool names like Titanic and the Irresistible, and what was the one that Lord Horatio Nelson had? It was the Majesty. I think that was what it was. Like, they have these super cool names, whereas, like, the Americans were like the
Just name them after
USS.
states.
Yeah, like the USS Connecticut.
Great.
Which,
The
hey,
Delaware.
the Delaware. No, nothing against those states. They're great
No,
states.
no, great states. It's just we got to be better and more original with our names, guys. Like name the boats.
Yeah,
Name the boats
think
better.
about something intimidating, like the USS, like, Mega Destroyer, the Colossus, the the ship that, if you see us off the port, we have a problem with your economic policy. Something that would really strike fear
Sure.
rather than the USS Flamingo.
I'm gonna go with USS Angry Letter.
The USS F bomb. So yeah, the Inflexible was damaged, so that was knocked out. The Suffering was damaged. The Ocean, again, another real strong
Mm,
name there.
let's
That
go.
was sunk.
We sunk into the ocean. The ocean was in the ocean.
Yes, it went to its own kind. It
I love it.
it became it's very transcendent.
Yeah,
It
it was
went
a nice
home.
passing.
It was a nice passing, but out of all these ships, though, we're probably looking at 2,800 people dying.
Jesus.
Yeah, and so only six of the ships were left that were left big enough to fight, and only six support ships were left. So these were the smaller boats that would house the armaments, like the shells, the powder charges, and so that's all that was left out of this gigantic fleet. Granted, it wasn't the latest and greatest of the British Army, but
Still though.
this was a huge failure,
Yeah.
and this took a toll. This was literally just like the first day of the conflict. Typically, when you have an invasion this big, keep in mind that this invasion, both the navy and the military, or the boots on the ground aspect of it, this was the biggest land invasion in human history, and it failed this horrifically. So basically, eventually, after I think it was like 2 days of this, of the incessant firing, the incessant, mining, and the ships being blown up, basically, they had to pull out. Like, this is dumb. This is going nowhere. We're not getting anywhere. And what's really ironic behind all this is that the boats, or the naval craft that made it through, were the ones that were the most criticized because they didn't have cannons, and that were the submarines.
The power
The
of the sub, man.
Yeah, yeah. Way to go, Subway! You had something going for you until you hired Jared. Um, it looked good on paper, but yeah, when
Oh
those
god.
lawsuits came in, yeah, no.
Add it to the list of failures.
Yeah, yeah, that could be another episode into
New
itself.
episode.
Um,
Subway guy.
hey, Jared, I want a foot long, fully loaded. Sorry, I had to quote Deadpool.
Jesus
Um,
Christ.
and so yeah, basically, yeah, it was the submarines. The submarines would actually go underneath the mines, and they were the ones that made it through the straits. This is over the course of months to a year. They made it through the Narrows. They actually made it through Constantinople. Yeah, they were just chilling in the Black Sea, just doing their own thing. Like, hey, here we are.
Did they at least were they able to finish like the mission? Were they able to get points of contact to Russia, or did they have to circumvent everything and just do it a different way?
Um, so these submarines, they like when a land invasion was going on in the actual like Gallipoli Peninsula, yeah, which was its own flaming hot mess. During that whole time, that literally went from what was it? It was November of 1914, and then it ended in in January 9th of 1916. A little over a year of conflict here. The submarines made it through the Black Sea. They kind of surfaced. They really couldn't do anything
Dang.
because it's not like they have land attacking abilities. It's not like they really had. I mean, what were they going to do? Launch torpedoes at the coastline? So yeah, they spent some time there in the beautiful Black Sea, like on a vacation, and then eventually they submerged, and then they went through the Narrows, and they popped their way out in the Aegean Sea, and then they just kind of went home.
Alright, so basically, all of this was for nothing, and we lost a billion men for nothing.
And that's the thing. It's like we haven't even got to the land invasion, right? When
Yeah.
we look at the figures that led into the land invasion, the Allied strength, 15 divisions, 489,000 men, 345,000 British, including the Irish and then the Indians from like India, not Native Americans and Newfoundlanders, 79,000 French, 50,000 Australians, and 15,000 New Zealanders, supported by 2,000 civilian laborers, i.e., the people that were supposed to take out these underwater mines. But the Australians and the New Zealanders were probably the biggest heroes because it was these guys. They called them Anzac, and it was the Anzacs that really pushed in super hard. They were the ones that took really the worst of the fighting, and they were the ones that saw realistically the biggest gains. And so once this naval disaster concluded, Churchill he resigned from his position as the first lord of the navy. He's like, clearly this isn't me. As a punishment from his leadership, i.e., the prime minister, they're like, well, we're going to put you on the committee of Gallipoli, meaning this guy couldn't go anywhere else in the war. This guy couldn't, like Churchill, couldn't really offer his insight into the Western Front. He couldn't get involved in anywhere he was a part of. And it's funny how it works. Like in America, we have a commanding general, and then, this general will then work with subordinate generals and then colonels and orchestrate the attack. On the British side of things, it was like, hey, no, we're obviously going to have generals and colonels and majors and captains and lieutenants on the field, but we're going to have a political committee oversee the whole campaign. So they would have politicians that would be giving the final approval for things. And so when Churchill resigned from basically being an admiral, he resigned, and then as a punishment for this huge dumpster fire, they put him on the committee of the Gallipoli campaign.
So
So
they
he was
took him
kind of like,
from military to politics?
well, yeah, he was always politics. It was like, hey, bro, we don't want you giving advice to anybody in any part of this war.
Got it.
We are going to just bottleneck you into this little campaign so that if it fails, your career fails. That's exactly what happened. In January 1915, the actual campaign, the land battle part of it, started to that went into place. This is where they started to actually try to shell and attack these forts and these bases. Instead of trying to come in through the Dardanelles, they landed a bunch of people on Cape Helles, and then the French went after Kumkale towards the south. Really, the land campaign turned into just, like almost like a D-Day type of thing where they found this narrow strip of land and they landed as many men in there as possible. So they were super concentrated. Like within days and weeks of this happening, we're talking hundreds of thousands of soldiers landing here absolute confusion. It didn't help either that they named the beaches like S, V, W, X, Y, and
Nice.
then the Z beach was all the way up on the north side. They called that Anzac Cove for the Australian New Zealand forces. When they tried to land, they got pushed way north. They were pushed, dozens of miles north. They were supposed to really land around like the Gaba Tepe region, but instead they get pushed up to the RE Burnu location, which was steep grades. It wasn't as heavily fortified, but it was steep grades, no shelter. There was absolutely no protection. And this Anzac Cove is probably the most famous part of this whole battle for like what they accomplished. Right? Because when they attacked, they made their way like halfway into the peninsula, like the Koja Dere region, right? Or the Eski, how do you pronounce it? Eski Kiwi. Again, language buffs out there, feel free to make fun of my pathetic pronunciations here. But like the Anzac Cove, the Anzacs, these Australian New Zealanders, they did a lot. They almost completely cut off the whole Gallipoli Peninsula. But down towards the south, though, in Cape Helles, there was absolute confusion. Nobody knew who was landing where at what time. Nobody knew what was going on. And there was a story I was reading. There was a foot soldier who actually like trying to find help marched his like he ran all the way into Krithia. It was unoccupied. There was no Turks there at all. And if the Allies had made its way all the way up to Krithia, they would have had a safe, sound, fortified city for a base of operations, and the Anzacs to the north would have essentially cut off all activity from the Turks from the peninsula going all the way up north. Teki Tepe, they would have been cut off. But that soldier got up there, and he's like, "Oh, well, I don't see anybody here, so I'm just going to run back." And he didn't tell anybody. Well, no, I'm sorry. He did tell people. He told his officers, like, "Hey, there's a town that's unoccupied. It's fortified. We should take it." Well, we need to get permission to take it. So, like, the lieutenant had to reach out to the captain, who was further behind. The captain had to reach out to his major, who was on the coast. The major had to reach out to the colonel, who was like down in Cape Helles. And then that colonel had to reach out to the general, who was in Egypt, being fanned with palm fronds.
Amazing. That's
Oh, yeah,
sufficient.
they're very efficient, and
Yeah.
it would take days to weeks to get permission to do anything. In fact, I would say one of the biggest lessons that came out of this disaster of a battle, it was how we handle leadership in the military now. So, like, if you were to look at, say, on the Japanese front, World War II, your commanding officer was God. Your commanding officer, his word was the final word. No other import was going to be accepted. Nothing was going to be tolerated. It was his way or you die. Okay. On the European side, especially in the American side, you could have a captain who's like, okay, we're going to go run up and take this hill. But a lieutenant or a corporal could come out and say, but wait a second, I was just up there, and they could show on a map, like they've got machine guns here, 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 and there. If we attack that, we're going to lose a lot of men. Oh, well, okay. Well, we need to rethink this. And so it's a completely different way of thinking that came out of this whole mess. Long story short, what happened over the course of 1915? It turned into a stalemate. The Turks and the Allies focused on making trenches. The Allies had pretty much the entire coastline for the Aegean Sea. The Turks condensed themselves in the Khalid Bar Plateau, so they essentially had the high ground. Sorry, Anakin, you went the first. Sorry, Obi-Wan, you went the first. It was the Turks. They had the high ground.
Good for them.
They thought what movies could come of this, so they figured, people with
Why not pick the biggest movie franchise in the world? Yeah.
yeah, no, they knew that what was going to inspire those movies with laser swords and stormtroopers who can't shoot worth anything. Yeah, going to be great.
All
Actually,
right,
that had nothing to do with Star Wars. Star Wars was based off of aerial combat from World War II.
we'll get into that. Yeah, yeah,
Another episode. Um,
yep.
so basically put, it turned into a stalemate. There were a lot of these fights like they were identical to what was happening in France and Germany. Some guy would blow a whistle, everybody would yell and grab their guns, climb up the ladders, and then charge and then just get mowed down. And then the Turks would do the same thing and they would get mowed down. And we're talking thousands and thousands of people dying for just like 10, 15 feet of ground. The other issue, the Allies, since they were on the low ground, what rolls downhill, right? We've all have heard of this term. The poo always rolls downhill. So all the dead bodies that were decaying, the human waste, the excrement, the stagnant, nasty water was rolling down into these trenches. And then if the heat exhaustion in the summer didn't get you, then the dysentery. It's amazing how dysentery can destroy the British Army as well as your whole entire family in Oregon Trail.
It's the same thing.
Oh,
My
dysentery.
God,
Yeah, like if whoever invented Imodium was alive back then, they would have won the Nobel Prize.
100%.
100%. Yeah, it
Yep.
can't like your student. Yeah, the poo always
The
rolls.
poo. Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a poo storm in the end.
Yes, yeah, like front row tickets,
Yep.
and that's what they were dealing with. So, like the second half of this whole conflict, it wasn't just about being shot, although it was because the Turkish snipers that were hanging up on that Khalid Bar plateau, they had full clearance of the entire coastline. So let's say you got pulled off the front line. You've been up there for like a month. You haven't showered in a month. You haven't really had much water or food. The only thing you see is the Aegean Sea, and you're thinking, I'm at least going to get a bath. You're just going to run out there and at least try to clean yourself. But the snipers had that beach line all zeroed in. So whoever stepped out in that ocean was probably going to get shot.
Yikes.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, with this, sorry.
Yeah, no, it gets worse. Like
Uh
we look at the commanding general Hamilton.
huh.
He was in Egypt the entire time. I think he only made his way to the coastline twice during this whole campaign.
Lazy.
Well, yeah, but I also think too, think about this guy. Like 1914, he was a part of the greatest military in the world. Like all the way from like the 1850s up to the present, it was the British military that ruled the world. Like, why would we even entertain the idea of me having to spend much time on this coastline?
That's fair.
Yeah, like when you look at the mindset going in, it's the same exact mindset that America had going into the Korean conflict or the Vietnam conflict.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we defeated Hitler and the Japanese Empire. If we can defeat those guys, then the small ragtag army of dissenters shouldn't be a problem.
That's what
Well,
happens when you get cocky.
yes. Yep. Victory tends to make the winners weaker.
Yeah.
And we see that so many times. And that's exactly what happened here. It eventually got to the point where Hamilton, you're done. You're out. We are done with this. You're never yeah, you're not going to fix any of this. And I have a quote here from The Real Fight for Gallipoli by Peter Hart. It says here, the Allied campaign was plagued by ill-defined goals, poor planning, insufficient artillery, inexperienced troops, inaccurate maps, poor intelligence, overconfidence, inadequate equipment, and logistical and tactical deficiencies at all levels.
That's not a good rap sheet.
Like there's nothing in here that was going to work out well. And so
So, what did Churchill do after this big dumpster fire poop storm in order to get to where he was in World War II?
we'll see now this is where it gets interesting because the Brits, they send out another general. I think his name is Monroe. They're like, "Hey, dude, you're experienced. You know what's going on. Go out there, give us a no BS assessment. What's going on?" He got there. He looked at everything, and he's like, "This is a disaster. We're never going to take this peninsula. We will never take it." And all for what? Because keep in mind when we look at the timeline, this was January of 1916. Russia was looking really iffy right now, right? Because the Bolshevik Revolution was just right around the corner, a lot of political dissent. They were having a tough time on their front of the war. And it kind of got to the point where Charles Monroe, he's like, or this new general, he's like, what are we going to gain from this? What are we going to get from actually taking this peninsula? Russia? Like, they have nothing to offer us right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sir Ian Hamilton, he was relieved. Monroe came in on basically October 31st of 1915. 1916, full retreat. Now, by this time, Churchill had already resigned. He had already, he's like, my career is over. I've got to try to salvage what's left of this. So he resigns. He basically signs up to be a colonel, a very low ranking colonel on the front lines in France. He literally, I was reading his biography not too long ago. Basically, he did this hoping that he could at least die in some glorious manner, right? That
Hmm.
that his assumptions and his strategies, he would get blown up and try to redeem himself to some extent. The only really interesting win for the Allies was the retreat. So while Churchill was now in France in a trench trying to figure out a way to die, the this Sir Charles Monroe, he orchestrated the retreat like unproportioned with Dunkirk, right? That we've all seen the movie and kind of know something about. But he told his troops to create mechanisms where their rifles would fire on their own. Not accurately, just fire, like over the course of a night. So they set up these mechanisms that had like a water can, and they would poke a hole in it, and as the water would slowly drip out, it would be on a pulley where then the counterweight would slowly lift up, and it would pull a string that was attached to the trigger of the rifle. And they set up hundreds of these. So during the course of the night, when the Allies were basically getting on boats and getting out, the Turks were they thought they were still under an attack, so they never charged.
Smart.
Yeah, like literally that whole entire retreat, I think only a handful of allies died during that. They managed to get out, the 100,000 some odd men that were there. And then it was a couple of days later, the Turks were like, wait a second, the British aren't firing. What's going on? They walk down and they see that all the trenches were empty. There was no more ships, and they won. Even like Turkey kind of treated this like the American Revolutionary War. They thought that this victory was the greatest day in their history. It was their Yorktown. And it really changed the shape of Turkey, its political influence, going all the way through the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Yeah, even to this day, the people of of that region still herald that day as one of their greatest accomplishments, and rightly so. I mean,
Yeah.
they took on
They took on the Persians as the 300 Spartans.
exactly, yeah. So what happened here? Well, out of the United Kingdom, or I'm sorry, out of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Empire lost a total of 164,000 men. The United Kingdom lost 120,000. France lost 27,000. Australia 28,000. So they lost like half of their forces. And then New Zealand, British India, Newfoundland coming around 12,000 men. A grand total out of the Allies, it was a grand total of 188,000 men they lost during this little campaign for nothing.
Yikes.
So, what about Churchill? Obviously, we still know about this guy. We still know what he accomplished. He made his way back into the textbook somehow. Well, here's what he did. He didn't change his ways. What he did is he kept pushing forward. When he was in the front lines, he was looking at these giant water towers. He's like, it would be really handy to put men in those things. Let's put some wheels on it. Let's make these things bulletproof. They could ride over the barbed wire and the trenches, maybe throw a cannon in there. He basically,
Sounds like the ATTs from Star Wars.
yeah, but they didn't walk as much as they rolled.
World War One version.
Yes, yeah. He basically he came up with this idea like we could put guys in here, we could put guns on these things, we could put treads on these things. He basically helped create the tank. And the tank was the thing that overturned the war because they were bulletproof, they were barbed wire proof, they were mine proof. That was the thing that led up to this whole thing coming to an end a lot quicker. And from there, Churchill again didn't change his ways. Politically, he was very verbose. He would still write his letters to anybody and everybody who wanted to listen to him or not. Most didn't. It was during those letter writing campaigns that he learned how to write. He learned how to instill hope. And that's where he discovered that like hope is one of the most powerful weapons you can have in a war. He figured in World War II, the Germans did not have the Navy. Trust me. He knew what a Navy needed to be able to take on England and invade the land. The only thing the only thing the Germans could do was just bomb them. But that wouldn't be enough. And so as long as he could hold the people together until the Battle of Britain ran out of steam on the German front, then they have their landing point, right? They knew the Americans would get involved eventually. He knew that all he had to do was hold his people together long enough, and then he could go on the offensive. And I would have to say, like, this whole Battle of Gallipoli, especially the naval part of it being such a disaster, is the thing that really made him the leader that we know today. There's something about leadership that everybody should be aware of is that the best leaders are the ones who fail the most, not the ones that win all the time.
Yeah, because you won't learn if you're not failing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, weakness, when you conquer weakness, you replace it with strength. That's what Churchill kind of discovered then. That's what he figured out during that whole campaign. Until like you and I, like we made bad decisions that may cost us a promotion or a raise or whatever. This guy made a decision that absolutely tanked his political career, any chance of accomplishing anything. And yet he comes out of this, when he dies, he is considered one of the greatest leaders of the 1900s.
Yeah.
Not a half bad way to go.
No, not too shabby. Just gotta
But
keep on keeping on.
yeah, no, you got to keep on keeping on, and then embrace that failure.
Yep.
So where the Emu Wars were almost a comical but very light-hearted failure, this one is designed to be a holy crap. I thought I've screwed up royally in my life, but apparently I didn't.
Yeah. Like no matter how hard you fail, you can come back from it.
Exactly. And that was the whole purpose of this episode is just to really show that you can just take a face plant into the asphalt. You may not have the face to be a supermodel, but you would have the strength to be something probably better.
Yeah, I like it.
So
Like it.
that's why I don't have my camera on because I have the face for radio. So so yeah, that's the Battle of Gallipoli. We're gonna have some more notes in the show notes below. Um, Tons and tons and tons of videos out there. Really good YouTube videos out there. I'll try to put them in there. One I'm a big fan of is like the animated series. I think you found one on the Emu Wars. They have the same guy did another one for the Battle of Gallipoli.
Yeah, his show's called Oversimplified.
There we go. Yeah, and it's oversimplified, but boy, does it give you a lot of information. So
It's wonderful.
if you wanna dig into this more, one of the lesser recognized big battles of the 20th century, take a look. It's pretty intense. Like,
It's doozy.
I'm glad I wasn't involved with that. So so what do you got coming up? What do you have in mind for our next dumpster fire?
Yeah, so while you were getting eaten alive by mosquitoes and your wife laughed at you, I have been diving deep into ancient Egypt. So we're going to talk about Cleopatra and Mark Antony and how she failed to reach her full power. But also, I'm trying to decide whether I want to talk about how she failed or how society failed her.
Ooh,
And I think I'm going to go with the latter just because she is one of my favorite women in history for that reason. Um,
yeah. Yeah, no, she's always kind of piqued my interest as like a she was a woman that really understood her position not only as a woman in her society, but as a woman in Rome.
well,
And
she's interesting too because she lost, right? Her and Mark Antony lost. Therefore, the Romans wrote the history. So when you're reading history about Cleopatra, you have to take it with a grain of salt because they were salty.
well, and it's so fascinating because the Greeks, as I'm learning, the ancient Greeks had a huge relationship. They had a really good friendship with the Egyptians, and I think the Egyptians had that same train of thought when they were addressing the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was more into dominance and exerting power, where the Greeks, like especially the Athenians, were not. I'm really curious to see where you take this because yeah, Cleopatra, I was saying before, like she understood the role of the woman in Egypt was vastly different than the role of the woman in the Roman Empire.
Right.
And I
She knew what she was doing.
she knew how to work it, and she knew how to manipulate things. And what I think is even more fascinating is that she's probably, I wouldn't say she's the first, but she's probably the first major leader that really wrote the book on like this is how men think and this is how you exploit it.
Yes, she's one of the first in written history, at least, that we have who exploited men using womanly desires, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah,
She knew what she had and she used it to her full advantage, and she's one of written history, one of the first to do that. Who gained so much power? She did. She gained a lot of power, and she had the
yeah,
potential to rule Rome. She
yeah,
didn't quite get there, but she got close.
yeah. And you know what? Sometimes getting close is good enough. Made it in a textbook.
A few. Plus a Shakespearean tragedy, which after reading everything about Cleopatra just made me kind of salty. And then after that, we're finally, I think now historians today are starting to appreciate her as who she was, as opposed to like historians a decade ago, even or 2 decades ago, just going off of the Roman writings, talking about how she was too promiscuous and she was just telling Antony what to do. Like she was controlling Antony, and it was all, she was just an evil scheme type of thing, and Antony was a big baby about it, which I mean, kind of true, but at the same time, that was like a joint thing with her and Antony, I feel like. Anyway, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. I don't want to ream on about it for too long,
Yeah,
but
yeah. No, there's a lot there. So yeah, that's what you've all got uh coming up. I know the episode ran a little long, but yeah, we will. I'll figure out something in post production, and
yeah, we'll make it
oh
work.
yeah, we'll make it work. What's the worst that could happen, right?
Too much World War I. Come on.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be fine. It's just fine. So yeah, thank you all for listening. This was the Gallipoli War Fire. Join us next time for foray into ancient Egypt, and let's see what an Egyptian dumpster fire looks like.
Bye.
All right, take it easy, guys.